Welcome everyone to the Regeneration Podcast. Again, mostly my fault, but there's been something of a delay. I've had a lot of weekend engagements, and my good friend Michael Martin's finishing up his CSA year in some ways, which have made Saturdays a little more difficult. But today we gather on, I don't know about you guys, and people already recognize one guest, Guido Preparata, Dr. Guido Preparata, but Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day, it's one of those ones just like statues. Um, Instead of tearing down statues, why can't we put up a lot more?
Yeah, we
Um,
need an Italian on the show. It's
That's
it's
right.
Columbus Day.
yeah. I just think both are fine. If somebody wishes me happy Indigenous Peoples Day, I'm totally cool with that. And I think we can have two. We can have more statues. We don't have to tear them down. But here we are on this day, and we're with Dr. Guido Preparata. And first of all, Michael, what? Tell me, assess your CSA year. We tend to track your life on the farm a little bit.
Uh, well, it was good. The first half was really good because we had a lot of rain. Second half was not as was still okay, but we had drought basically for 2 months.
We really did, didn't we?
Yeah, it was rough.
Same thing
So
here. Yeah.
yeah, in fact, I was just outside looking at our pond, which is so we have a dock and we have long posts that hold the dock up, and usually maybe 2 feet of the post are exposed to
Okay.
air.
Yep.
But now it's down to like 5 or 6 feet. So that's how low the pond is.
That's really low. I
Yeah.
jumped off that dock with my good friend Scott Martin when we were at your place. Right? Same dock.
That's right. Same
Yeah.
dock.
Yep.
Yeah, I
No
wouldn't
swim.
jump off it today.
No,
Yeah.
I went swimming. Pretty cold. That night it was seaweedy in a good way. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, well, good. It's good to hear. And I even before we kind of logged on, sometimes we just start hitting record. I was talking to Guido and we began a conversation, but I'm going to continue because it's a point of relevancy that can take us on. Um, it can take us into many different areas. But Guido, the 2 years ago, no, 3 years ago, just a couple of weeks ago, pretty much coterminous with yeah, because my friend Father Gerard was over in Italy when I was there with you. But about 3 years ago, you and I, at your invitation, we were at a conference in Bolsena, Italy, at an old Franciscan kind of monastery. Um,
Yes, yes,
and it was really nice. It was really fun.
it was.
And somebody I hadn't heard of until like weeks before the conference. But there, how many people might have been there? Like 15 to 20, 15 to 25?
In that room with him that day.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, maybe more. Yeah,
might be more.
thereabouts. Yeah.
I forget. But one of the people, there was about five presentations or six over the course of a couple of days. But one of the presenters and one of the attendees was Dr. Richard Werner. And so that was new for me. He was certainly engaging. He was there with somebody I'd known from Twitter, Taylor Hudak, who you can look up, kind of a progressive journalist. And then I was visiting our grandson with our in-laws in Maine towards the end of summer, first week of August, I guess. And riding back from Maine, my wife and I was just looking up things to listen to. And I saw, I think it was a tweet from my youngest son, Aiden, but that people were talking about Dr. Richard Werner, who had been on the Tucker Carlson podcast. And when you're talking about the new media ecosystem, that's like going from 0 to 100 miles an hour pretty quick. And so I don't know, I was just going to check in with you. I might put Werner's name in like the subject, probably not the title, but he's trending right now. I listened to the podcast. Um, Basically, indisputably, it seems to me he's going to tell you some lies about the banking system that we believe, like just all, that's just made up, that money's created out of thin air when banks um and so that went on. But he's also like his movement right now, and by and large, it's a good thing, but it's all these regional banks. But when my son Aiden was asking me like, where does Guido and Werner, where do they agree and disagree? The first area I could think, and you can tell me if it's true, Guido, would be um, that he's still going to take, well, he's going to take some things that you qualitatively disagree with, for granted, probably, some level of interest where you're against it on principle. But when you look at his vision of banking, you've seen Princes of the Yen and so forth. He's a radical, and people heard him. He's thinking a completely different way. People were, I think, exposed to a lot of the lies about the current banking system. He thinks, most of the evils come from it being run at too high a level. So his answer seems to be like local generators of, he's a fan of quantitative easing in one sense. Where do you, even knowing the way he thinks, tell us a little bit about like Richard Werner in your relationship and where you agree and disagree with him? Because when Philip Balboni joins us, which I think he's going to do, one of the things going on, in addition to all the crazy politics, is what's going on in the world of finances right now, the AI bubble, speculative bubbles, and things like that. Start kind of waxing on some of those themes, and Michael will jump in, and Philip when he joins us.
Yeah, I don't remember anymore. I remember that I was going to this conference in Japan, and to a Marxian association, a Marxian community of scholars at one of the Tokyo universities. And so, in preparation for that, on the plane, I finally got to read this book by him, Princess of the Yen, which I didn't know. He eventually, many years later, when I would meet him personally, he told me that the book had an incredible story. That he is a Catholic who became an evangelist, and the evangelist movement in Japan supported the book and allowed him to go to a very popular TV show, primetime Japanese TV show, and thereby allowed him to sell gazillions of copies of this book, which is, well, I mean, it's an interesting story, but I mean that's how it works. And to sell books, it's how it works. And the book, no, the book is good, and I remember reading it, very fascinating. And there's a whole story about the book that there was a missing chapter, because it's a whole story about how Japan deregulated completely and literally messed up its economy. And whereas it had what I think Richard is a fan of, he's not necessarily, is not anarchoid at all. I mean, although he'd be favorable to an anarchoid system, but he's also very much a fan of good solid nationalist dirigism. I think he holds in high
Say that.
esteem.
I don't know what you meant by that. National dirigism.
Dirigism, it's a word for nationalist, orthodox, and growth-prone policy for the benefit of the country as a whole.
Okay.
So I think when we spoke, he held in great esteem the Prussian system, which for him was, he's very much into this idea of credit creation. If there is a will to launch growth through the banking system, you can create a virtuous cycle. And everything else, or any other kind of parasitical, finance-driven type of economy, he sees it as some kind of metastasizing evil and so on. And we all agree about that. And to make a long story short, in this book of The Princess of the Yen, where he talks about this Japanese debacle, and there was a missing chapter, which the publisher, which M.E. Sharp didn't allow him to publish, was because and as he told me, and I wasn't surprised in the least, because the question was, why did they do it? And the book didn't say it. And he says, because the Americans asked him so. When I went to his he invited me to Oxford, because he has an annual seminar entirely directed by him. And I finally presented my piece on the balance of payments, which I think is possibly the best piece of political economy I've ever written. And it explains pretty much how America exercises financial dominance through the use of a single variable. And Richard was, he said, very impressed with this thing, although this paper went nowhere. One of my co-authors, Domenico D'Amico, we sent it to a lot of people. It never went anywhere. But and to me, his book is a corollary of all the things that I described. At the times, the U.S. was using these bubbles to achieve a variety of ends. Everything was programmed and piloted to a T, and it was not true, as Greenspan was saying, that they couldn't control anything. They controlled everything. But anyway, that's a long discussion that belongs to that. So Anyway, so I liked the book and I've always wanted to meet him. And I know he was a very high level guy with extraordinary experiences in the private sector too. I mean, he was brilliant. He spoke fluent Japanese and also was roughly my age. So I kind of was in awe of this character and I've always wanted to meet him. And then for some reason, I heard that he was a fan of my book, Conjuring Hitler, which I was really pleased with. And long story short, eventually we finally met after knowing of each other for so long in Oxford in 1919. So we had a great time with him and everything else. I and then we invited him to Bolsena, where you were, and we saw him there. The idea in Bolsena was my idea, but I mean there were many minds behind this conference, and things didn't really gel the way I wanted. I really wanted this to be an intimate talk amongst few people about how to create, if we could, a blueprint for a renaissance, for a rebirth of what we could call communitarian economics, if it's even at all conceivable. And Werner, I know aside from all his work in macroeconomics and the theory and all his many there's thousands of papers about banking and all that, I was really because he has apparently he's very active and he has many initiatives and activities, one of which was this regional banking you were mentioning. Valhalla, I don't know what it's called, some kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
kind of network of regional banks in England. So I was amazed. I mean, wow, he even has that. And so we invited him. I invited him, and we pursued him for a while just to come, even though we had no funds or anything. But he was kind enough to come. And to talk about this, but he didn't. So it was a kind of I don't know why. I mean, he talked about his usual critique of traditional economics through the lens of banking, but he didn't talk about, the what are we going to do? What I generally describe as the enough babble. We need hands-on people. What is the hands-on scenario going to look like? And so you, Werner, not only a guy who's done a lot in the theoretical domain, but apparently you're involved in practical stuff, and that's great. Apparently, it's already running. So tell us about it. And it didn't happen. I don't know
Mm.
ever since that meeting. I don't know what he's been doing in that sector, and I don't know what he's been doing. Period. Until I heard about the that he was on the show, and and that's great. And probably I'll send him an email and ask him what's up and to be kept abreast of his latest developments. I don't know where he's going right now, but I mean he's achieved even more fame now on a broader scale, and that's good. I don't know what's going to come next, but that's my story.
Well, and again, Michael, chime in with anything, but this will get. You mentioned your book, Conjuring Hitler, you know, and it's another near miss, right? Like everything going on, and my son Aiden would say, the free speech issue, which you predicted an ideology of tyranny, coming a two-horned approach, that this whole thing was kind of two wings of the same bird of prey. But let's go. Your Guido Preparata, you have big ideas. Um, what do you think is going on in the world banking system right now?
Right now,
Where
I
there's
don't know.
so many current events. I'm sorry, there's so many assassinations, so many current events right now. What you've always studied the game. So your article, and I've read it, and you might summarize it. You said it's your greatest contribution, but you were just using, it was an analysis of how the government, since Bretton Woods, had used kind of T-bills. And then you even furthered, I think, your article in your book that people can buy on Amazon, Phantasmagoria on Amazon, just how um, the U.S. geopolitical machine is tied to the dollar intrinsically.
Yeah.
So we have things going on in Israel, Gaza. Start telling the story of what you think is going on right now.
Well, briefly on the economics, the problem is that this paper that we did with Domenico, the statistical part, which wasn't complicated, it was just from an accounting point of view, really tedious and laborious. It took us virtually a year to collect the data because the statistics of the balance of payments in the United States has been deliberately abolished since 1975. So you don't know exactly what's happening.
Why is that important?
It's critical because it shows you
Right.
it really by reading what does the U.S. do? They print dollars and they buy up whatever they want to buy. They buy the juiciest assets all over the world.
Did
This
it
is how
just
they
not
do it.
show up one year, or did they announce they were no longer doing it?
They announced it, but really low key, and
Yep.
and nobody said it's like even you talk to professors in macroeconomics, or we even talk to people in the banking system, central banking response. The head of the international exchange desk. We sent him our paper, and this guy was clueless. It's unbelievable, and they didn't know about this, but it's a fact. You can see through the balance of payments, you can have a very clear perspective. You could see through that account what the US does. The way it does, and it's an exogenous. I mean, it's like it's the anchor and everything revolves around it. And central bankers have said this even from the time of the Nixon era, and everything it's the imperial constraint determines everything. It's not like, oh, we're managing things at home and then we're doing our little thing in the rest of the world. No.
Mhm.
Policy number one is to control the world, and everything has to rotate around that, including what's happening domestically. And the story under Reagan is a classic example of that. People didn't understand, and this is why I mention in that piece, because I'm a big fan of John Carpenter's horror movies. And Carpenter in that movie of his, I don't know if we discussed this, They Live, that classic,
Oh yeah.
was saying I made a statement against the Reagan era because he said I'm an old type of fan of cowboy capitalism. There's nothing wrong with making money, but this was just too much. And so I had to make a statement about the impoverishment of America, the high interest rates, the unemployment, the homelessness, and so on. And I'm thinking, John, I mean, you're a great genius, but on this, and the movie is great, but it's not like there's perfect continuity. It's not that there was a discrete jump there. I mean, there was policy wise, but that what happened under the Reagan era was something that it was business that had to be taken care of, and it had been. If you, I found it in the reports of the economic report to the president during the Kennedy administration. They said, we got a problem here, and we got to do a lot of really drastic changes in the economy to fix it. And it took them 20 years, but they did it. So there's a continuum. It doesn't matter who's president or not. This is what they do. So in a nutshell, what do? They print money. They buy. They print dollars. It's essential that the dollar be the reserve currency of the world, or else this game doesn't work. And they buy. They buy everything. They buy land, not so much, depending which, but they buy juiciest industrial assets. In fact, whenever now Italians have waken up that, oh, America is evil because of Trump. We got to boycott America. And so, even on my aunt's iPhone, there's all the products you shouldn't buy, when you go to the store. you know, and what these dumbass Italians didn't realize and eventually realized was that you go to the store and everything is American owned because, it's all multinationals and this is how they do it. The key, however, to this game is that these dollars that flow to these countries, they do this everywhere. You got to be sure that they're not sent back. Well, they can buy stuff from America, and they do, and you can see that from the balance of trade. But not all of them, the rest goes to the capital accounts, and not all of them. And this problem emerged very soon. When the Europe was reconstructing after the war was great. Everybody was really thirsty for dollars, but they rebuilt pretty fast, actually so fast. Already by the end of the 50s, some of the dollars were flowing back. And the Americans were like, what the hell? Not only that, they were starting to be redeemed in gold. And the US went, you got to be kidding me. You European pussies, you're asking gold from us, masters of the world?
Uh-huh.
How dare you? You European nobodies. And the Europeans were like, the French and others were like, well, we want the gold. We don't want these dollars anymore. And if once you understand this, all the political economy of those years and international is clear. And the Americans are scrambling with very, very creative solutions to make sure that all these dollars don't come back to America and certainly not to disrupt the gold standard.
Mhm.
Eventually, they had to let it go because they couldn't.
Yeah.
But ever since, so they had to change. And with Reagan, what happened? They said, okay, we're not going to sell. I mean, commercially, we can't. I mean, we could do it, but we don't want a major war. And of that sense, it's too disruptive. We're going to sell them securities. Hence begins, the Reagan era of the yuppies, the financialization. That's what they do. And ever since we're under that regime, I've reached this. So this is how I've reached. In that paper, we reached until 2015. The last 10 years, we didn't do because it's a lot of work. Nobody's paying us. Nobody's reading the paper anyway. So we didn't do the research. So what we thought was asking AI to do it for us. And my co-author did that. And even though I don't really trust because it requires a lot more penet, you know, um, statistical penetration than what an AI survey, superficial AI survey would do, it seems that they're still doing it. But so I don't know what the threat of these famous tariffs plays in
Yeah.
this game, because that was kind of the old game that Nixon was playing when he was trying to change things, when it was still, things were still in, they were not sure what to do, and they didn't do the Reagan transition yet. And so it was, and in fact, I think Nixon was ousted because he lost that war. He barked a lot, but couldn't really reverse the situation of defeating these European pressures against the dollar that they were sending back. So I don't know what's happening, and I would have to look about this bubble. They inflate bubbles, as a matter of fact, but not in a conspicuous and flamboyant way as they did with the leverage buyout one, followed by the Greenspan one about
The housing crisis. Yeah.
yeah, the high tech, and then the one with the mortgage crisis, the
Yeah.
last one, which exploded. Those three. Ever since they did it, I think they did it much more progressively without inflating too hard. And we saw that in real estate and the stock exchange. And so they decided it's still going on. Their process of buying up the world with the dollar still going on. The bubble still going on. And what you tell me about the AI, I have yet to look into it. But these dynamics, you can see them very clearly by seeing how the stock exchange is moving. So I would have to retake that analysis and go through it again. But I have not done it yet. But
Yeah.
now it's clear, and nobody in any corner of the discursive sphere ever broaches the problem in these terms. Why? Because it makes America looks like a bully, right? Which it is, and it's a bully in every sense. It's a bully with its basis. It's a bully with its larcenous approach. There's always this idea that it plays cleanly, that it's really competitive and dynamic. It is competitive. It is dynamic. It is creative. It is larcenous too. I mean, it's all those things, but that will not. It's not accepted in public discourse. Larcenous. We don't thieve. Oh, you sure do thieve, because that's what you do with the dollar. You can't say those things, but that's how it works.
Hmm. What do you think? This could be a related question, Guido, and I'm just thinking of, almost very current events. People who listen to you and you're wondering, I was mentioning before, Michael, you hopped on, that Aiden was saying, that Hitler is the super hot topic right now, right? Just because people are they're questioning everything. But Guido's work always kind of just stays a little kind of in the shadows and so forth. But one of the things, Guido, I think people, it's not misunderstand, but everybody's kind of looking for certainty. But right now, when we saw, the headline that everybody's following, and I think, nobody's upset that there's not people dying in the same numbers this morning in Palestine and so forth. But with this issue of, um, the biggest thing going on right now is the young men, it seems to me, and Michael, feel free to chime in or disagree, but you have just, I'm not even weighing in on an opinion, but young men in that same ecosphere um, of of Tucker Carlson, of Glenn Greenwald, of Dave Smith, of Tim Dillon, that the Israel-Palestine narrative has changed, so that like Israel seems to have lost all support.
Mhm.
And there's even narrative surrounding the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and we could get into the weeds on that. How do you, as just like a friend of the podcast over 3 years, how do you actually try to describe to a young guy who's trying to figure out who controls who? What does that
Yeah.
look like in the nitty gritty? You
Very
know?
simple. Very
Okay.
simple.
I didn't know
Yeah.
you were going to say that. Okay, go. Yeah.
No, super simple. As for conjuring Hitler, it's funny. I was in a podcast with a bunch of people sponsored by this house Trine Day out of Oregon, whose head is this interesting radical intellectuals, Chris Milligan, who's published a book by Sean Stone on the that I wrote that essay on the church
Right.
for.
Yeah.
It's published a book by these two Scottish authors on Hitler, where their focus is on three books essentially. Carol Quigley's famous
Tragedy
um,
and Hope.
Tragedy and Hope, and Anthony Sutton's about the financing of Wall Street financing the Nazis, and my book.
Oh,
And so I'm in the pantheon with those two, and I'm the only one
yeah.
alive for the time being. So for some time, and so and it was funny to hear them, and they were very they were praising me. It was very sweet, and then these gentlemen from Scotland. But one of them said, no, both of them said the book is really hard. And
It is hard. It is hard.
okay, and for me, and I'm always like, no, it's not hard. It's actually it's plain. What the hell? Anyway, so I wrote the smaller version, The Incubation of Nazism. So I hope that can have more traction. It's 100 pages. So
I'll link it. I'll link that book specifically in the
God willing.
podcast.
But I realized, no, I hadn't realized how, these publishing companies that they publish these books, and you look at the book and it looks like not much. In a sense, it's not like a tome, but it actually is a tome because
Mhm.
their fonts are minuscule. So that's why. And I hadn't realized what a heavy thing my book was. And I guess I gave in, and it really is. And especially as I went through the Italian translation with this person, this acquaintance that did it for me, and as I did the second edition, it really is big and heavy. And yes, tough. I get it. Um, Gaza. All right. I think I said this before. Here I am in this really provincial, no, nothing cute, but nothing place in the heart of Italy. And there's lots of here. The cultural events are um, the what's it called? The chestnut fair, the truffle fairs, the sausage fairs. That's the fairs, and that's all there is. And these truffle fairs, they were selling with the truffles and olive oil, Palestinian flags. And I'm thinking, what the hell is this? So. Um, And you said, and Israel has lost a lot of its prestige and whatever.
Seems to have.
Yeah, yeah, there's
Mhm.
something weird and fishy going on here.
Fishy.
This is an operation. This is obviously an operation. So all this, and everybody's like going, oh, Israel, oh, and I'm thinking, it's like the Italians, it's like the Italians with the ketchup. I mean, what the hell? Wake the hell up. It's been like this for as long as it's been. I mean, yeah, of course it's atrocious. It's not, but October 7th, that's an operation. If I were a Palestinian, I would go and throw hand grenades myself at Hamas because, it's like you're endangering me and mine. So obviously, Hamas is maneuvered and they are trying to do something.
Mhm.
Question is, what? I don't know. We will see. Is
But
it
I think it was a enormously, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, enormously successful propaganda project on scale with I mean, with the COVID stuff, right? It was that level propaganda, which succeeded in. Now, I'm not a supporter of Israel, and certainly not a supporter of Hamas, but just to watch it unfold, it's kind of like the level of propaganda that happened and it does it by greasing palms as well as spreading information, as we saw in England during the Reformation, the English Reformation. Is the same kind of project, right? And it's on and I really would suggest that in the United States, this, even though it's been going on forever, it hit into an interesting Marxist even hyperdrive under Obama. And Obama, what was the law? I can't remember what it's called, that he canceled that disallowed propaganda to be spread within the borders of the United States, that the CIA could do it overseas, but not here. and he changed that. What I've seen over the last however long with the whole thing with since what was it 2 years ago, October 7th, three.
Yeah, yeah, two, I think.
I mean, an enormously successful propaganda program project, and people ask me, why don't you pick a side? I said, well, I don't know either language, and I have no idea what the hell's going on, but I know propaganda when I see it.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
yes.
because I was going to say propaganda for what? And you're Guido, you're kind of saying same thing. We just don't know exactly what. Go ahead. Yeah.
No,
Interesting.
I'll finish the reasoning. Yes,
Yeah.
of course it's propaganda, and it's like what Nixon says. If it's on TV, it's real, and people and the power of TV is enormous.
Hmm.
And exactly, you got to play by the rules. You got to pick a side. As far as we know, I don't know anything. I mean, everything we've been seeing on TV, and I don't have TV, could be fake.
Hmm.
They construct the narrative entirely, and they show you what they want to show you, and they're very good at it. It's like Hitchcock, right? And it's in filming the London bombing, it's the same thing.
Hmm.
It's whatever, I mean, and they are rousing people's emotions, and they have been successfully now. And this is a novelty against Israel. It was never like this before. And you see people with the Palestinian Italians, people with their Palestinian pin on their lapel. I mean, so extremely successful. And I'm saying, don't be, I mean, I'm not saying don't root but I say you are being manipulated. There is no doubt. One, guaranteed. This is a first. And now, it's like, oh, Israel is losing prestige. No, it never had any prestige. They are making it look as if it is losing prestige. The question is why? I don't know why. We'll see. We'll soon see why. But they are. Second, people don't understand that the Middle East doesn't exist. The Middle East is British real estate. Period. They won that peace. Well, they actually had the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which they did in 1915, 1916 with
Hmm.
the French. The war wasn't even over, but they knew they would win it. They carved it. The French took a little slice. They took Lebanon and Syria, and the Brits took the rest. Lately, what we've seen through ISIS is the Anglo-American uses this rabble, this scum of the Islamists to take
Hmm.
Syria, and they got it. Now they pretty much did. I don't know. There's nothing left that the Anglo-Americans don't have. I mean, so
Let me ask you this, Guido.
mm,
Now, yeah, I mean, with these Islamists for sure. I mean, this is a big, but so for instance, England, London in particular, has been flooded with Islamists.
yeah,
Yeah, and other places as well. And it was actually happening in the United States s-
yeah,
in hyperdrive during the Biden administration. You would see
yeah,
these long parades of people coming through Mexico and almost no women, all all men of fighting age, and not necessarily from Central America. A lot of them were from the Middle East or from Africa or Haiti or wherever, right? And but this is so here's the thing. Now, why? Why would the Anglo-American Empire, and especially the Anglo part of that empire,
mhm.
encourage that?
All right. Well, yeah, good question. In a case, so that's their real estate. In those regions, they do whatever they want to do. There was never a question of any Palestinian rights to that territory. They took it from the Turks, it's theirs. And it's been terrain for experimentation, all these Iraq things. Those people are there by grace of Britain. So whatever's been staged there has been staged for through scripts that were just penned by Anglo-American screenwriters. That
Mhm.
is obvious. So there is no national question. That's British territory, according to the law of violence, which is the only law that counts. It's theirs, and they do whatever they want there. Now, why would they do this? Well, they would do this because one, these people got to have credibility. So you got to make them appear very strong and as a threat. So you got to put them on stage. one. And they do this, but they control every flow very carefully. And Islamists, it's not only Biden. And you remember in the 90s, some of the most vocal imams were preaching from those mosques in Brooklyn, pre 9/11 stuff. So
Mhm.
these games, which the British invented and when are cyclically, not cyclically, they are received in America with the usual lag. They've been playing them for a lot of the time. So they got to manage them and they got to give them visibility on the stage eventually to make everybody think that they are really a menace and a power of their own, which anybody who's been in the Middle East know that it's not. It's just a lot of sand and a world that's very much on the defensive and really backwards in this technological race, which is the only thing that seems to matter. So no. The other thing which they do, and we're seeing now the effects in England and in France, and they're doing it in Italy too. It's manifest. Well, it's because in this in by having this, by creating ghettos that are surcharged with the racial factor, but most importantly with the fanaticism, so-called devout religious fanaticism, you create tinderboxes. You have explosive situation, which render the situation at the level of the social fabric really destabilizing. The U.S. knows this very well because it has a black population, which is approaching 15%, of which it is terrified. Not of the black population itself, it is terrified of the numbers. And they know if you set the flame to that kind of wick, I mean, you're going to have problems. And they want to create the situations in all of the European countries as a further leverage for destabilization, right? And we see these things in Italy in real time. It is this
But
trickle of people coming in, and you know that they'll never be integrated because there's not a chance they will ever be integrated in our world, right? Our world, look at the West. I mean, could you think of a more inhospitable place? You know, racist, but even more classist than it is racist. Super expensive, where people just tear each other into pieces. Everything in the name of cooperation is shredded, and everything is about status and securing privilege. And these nobodies with nothing walking into these countries, they're going to be embraced? Of course not. They're going to go exactly where everybody's expecting to go, into the ghettos. They are here in Europe. They're subsidized. They got 35 euros a day, and
right.
they get allowances for their kids. And obviously, people are pissed, and the right gets their votes. But it's a game. It's all. They're not going to do anything about them.
No,
This
but my question is, what's the end
Hmm.
game for destabilizing your own country?
Destabilize. They're not destabilizing the country. The Italians are receiving orders from the states to let this happen. There's no doubt about this. It's documented. It's the U.S. that wants to keep all of Europe also in control through this kind of an inflow because
Simply divide and conquer, Guido, kind of like Michael's saying, just
they always divide and conquer. But there's another thing that we should say and speak it. The elite of the U.S. traditionally and culturally hates the Europeans. I could say can't blame
Goes
you,
both ways,
but
yeah.
mhm.
absolutely, and they still do, and they actually fear them still, especially the Germans, because they know, even though they beat them severely during the last two wars, nevertheless, they know that they're the only ones who can cause problems because they're just as resourceful they are, and they're probably just as mean as they are.
Well,
So,
I mean, doesn't it seem that it seems to
Huh.
me though that the destabilization project, I mean, I saw that under Biden and Obama. But I also see it coming from the EU and from the World Economic Forum, right?
in
Which
what
seems to
sense?
me is that seems to me right now. I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, just I know what I know. I know what they let me know is that seems to be right now anyway the primary driver for destabilization of what we could call the West.
What do you mean when the economic forum? How?
The World Economic Forum.
Yeah,
They seem to set, which, for decades nobody even knew who they were. And all of a sudden, they were the ones during the beginning of COVID, right? This is where the whole
yeah.
messaging about build back better and the new normal and all this kind of stuff, and where with the idea of also a social credit system, which actually was we see being about to be implemented in the UK right now, right? Um, 15-minute cities or whatever. That seemed to be over COVID anyway, where it really came to my attention. The driver for that kind of destabilization, or that, and I think it's connected to the financial system, at least from a little bit of, that I've read, that is, it's basically a balloon full of air about to deflate. So, and I think that it seems to me that in order to head that, that collapse off at the pass, they're trying to get to digital currency and digital ID so they can secure their hegemony in the next iteration of whatever civilization is.
Yeah, I don't. Yes, to try to answer what you're raising, I've heard from some friends in other European countries the theory that the COVID was engineered to get a breath of financial air, which I'd never heard before. It's another because I don't know. I still don't understand what the COVID thing was, and so this is a different theory that I heard. It's interesting. I don't know. As far as the one world government, there is no doubt, and we saw the one world government in action with COVID. I
Hmm.
mean, they corralled what 4 billion people in less than 2 weeks. So amazing. Yes, and you're right. World Economic Forum, up until 10 years ago, nobody knew who the hell they were and so on and so forth. I think they're smoke screens. They're put out there so people now say, oh, it's those guys. It's or with some of these postmoderns, this famous Italian postmodern who recently died, Tony Negri, who's was featured in my in the my this,
Ideology of tyranny. Yeah.
yeah, but now in the longer section of which I'm really with which I'm really pleased, and the Italian dimension it transcends that. It's an extraordinary story, which
Okay.
it's a cautionary tale. Yeah, it call it the trans. What they call it? They call it some kind of trans world alliance. Yeah, to make you think that it's kind of the James Bond Spectre. To me, this is bunk. These are all cutouts that the Anglo Americans put out there to confuse people. All the policies are to the benefit of the London New York axis. I mean, it's the way it is. And when I say this, and when I say this to an Anglophone public, I don't mean to be disrespectful or anything. I'm just saying, guys, we got to create our own transatlantic alliance to resist this. I'm so sorry that it's your people who are now in charge to do this, but they're your people, but they're not your people really. So, but it's difficult for people to make that disassociation, you know?
But if it's not say the and I'm if it's not say the World Economic Forum, Guido, like how do you and I say this too much, but like for our listeners, but in this case for me too, um, what's the most concrete you can make it? That just old banking families. Can we name like a few? Like if they're not meeting at the Trilateral Commission or things like this,
Oh,
how do they communicate? Like what's the most concrete? Because we're saying how like your work is always I see so much work out there as a near miss. I personally see your work as like right on, but you never you never like trend or anything. But and it's not to say that if you named these things, but people, the books, or even when I think Carol Quigley, started some of the popularity. It's because it started giving people names they could go with here. So if it's not the World Economic Forum, not the Trilateral Commission, do you do like, something that goes to the old, Milner Round Table and kind of still subsides in that way? Or what language would you use to get as precise as you can, which doesn't mean you're giving names and bios of everybody?
I know where you're going with this,
Yeah.
and the Carol Quigley is a really weird story, and
Yeah.
hard to fathom that this guy who was a patriot, a guy who really
Yeah.
he wasn't just a patriot, he was an admirer of the English ascendancy over the American system, was allegedly so shaken by the evil that he saw or the wrong-headed decisions that they made that decided to expose them and brought to the surface all these stories about the fraternities that were operating behind these maneuvers. Now, a lot of people, and I was talking about those podcasts with the Scottish authors, all these historians are really engrossed with this, and and I get it, and they are fascinating stories, but I don't go all the way, not because it's a rabbit hole. I mean, it is a rabbit hole, But because I don't think, in the end, I think it's not even a rabbit hole worth getting dirty getting in.
Okay.
Because one, as I told those friends, Ernst Junger said, unless you're part of those fraternities, stay away from them because you'll never understand their traceries and how they work. It's too
Hmm.
complicated. And general historians, as Junger said, they get lost in that stuff. And so
Hmm.
stay away. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'll stay away. And in the end, because it doesn't matter, I don't believe, people are some people are really satisfied in saying, oh, it's the Rothschilds. No, I don't think so. It's not the right. And in
Hmm.
the story of that I tell in Conjuring Hitler, where the protagonist of that story is a banker, the greatest central banker probably of all time is Montague Norman, of about whom we have two books. I mean, we know nothing of him,
Hmm.
and one has to reconstruct, as I did, reimagine what he did. You clearly see, and there's been books and people written by people who say, "Oh yeah, he was just an old school crafty fascist who was just," and I mean, some of the stupidest, most arrogant presuppositions. Underestimating these people is just a sign of cretinishness. These are fine minds, but they're operatives, and most importantly, they are subjects of the empire. And so I am completely not with the economistic thesis that it's these economic alliances that rule the world or occupy Wall Street because the bankers. No, the bankers are in the general staff of the empire, but they take orders, just as Montague Norman took orders. The order was do this. And these orders were huge. I mean, they were tall orders, but he was so good he could do them, but he was still under orders. And so bankers don't have, I think, the flair to rule the world. Um, you know, Traditional oligarchic families and people who've been in power generation after generations do. And
Hmm.
they are, which is not to say bankers don't count, but they are four-star generals in an army that's commanded by kings and their cultural successors. And so that's why for me, oh, the Milner Group, the Clifton Said, and all of that, yeah, fascinating. Tula Society, fascinating, but we'll never really know because these people have a vow of secrecy, an oath that they take to the tomb. They all do, so forget it. You can imagine, but you'll never know.
Hmm.
But what is certain is that to me, it's easy. I mean, I still see it in the old classical Renaissance style wars of empires, with one difference, though, that it's no longer the old kingdoms. Now we are in the studio-like set of Orwell's wars, which changes a great deal. So, because now
Hmm.
the US and England, speaking of the Middle East being English, they have everything.
Yeah.
So they own everything. And Orwell had already told you this in 48. So if you ask me, was it Rothschild, this,
Yeah.
that, the
Okay.
Milner? No, I'm going to tell you 1984. The book, inside the book, it's pretty much there, all laid out.
Hmm. Yeah.
They
Hmm.
have everything. It's like they own the stage, they own the actors, they own the script. They have themselves to play or find actors to play every role because there's nobody left. They kill
Hmm.
them all. All the
Okay.
empires and the church, they've taken them, they either destroyed them or taken them over. So
Yeah.
now the show has to be run like a TV show or a theatrical show where they got to have crisis actors for everything.
Hmm.
And so Putin plays the head of Spectra. And he is really happy because it's super cool to play the villain in a movie. You know, you got the best babes, you got the most sophisticated weapons. Yeah, you get blown up in the end, but while it's going, it's a lot of fun. And for the Russians or the Chinese, it goes well because in the end they don't even die because it's a freaking show.
Right.
So once you see things in this way, I think everything is pretty much clear. And then you know what's the great news? You don't even have to go figure it out and spend hours at the library or online. You're just going to ask AI to give you the kind of literature you need to support your thesis, and then you're home free.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because it's all performative, and I think especially well since Obama. When Obama was elected, I kept telling people he's just a rhetoric machine. He looks good, but you're just being sold. And they said you're a racist. Of course,
Yeah,
which
of
is
course.
part of the propaganda, right? But the thing that this whole performative aspect of it, and I raise this question with people, and nobody can ever give me a satisfactory answer. So if you go back to the Gulf War, remember in the Gulf War they had journalists embedded with the military as
Hmm.
they were, and so you saw a lot of live footage, whether it was whatever it
Peter
was,
Arnett, right?
you
Yeah.
saw real live war footage like you did in World War II as well, right? But with I don't think with either the Palestinian thing or with Ukraine, I've seen any live battle footage.
Hmm.
Have you?
Not foregrounded as much, not by the mainstream. Certainly on Twitter you see kids getting offed, or you see
You see,
guys in
you
trenches
you
launching.
don't see in the middle of the heat of the battle like you used to
Not
during
as
World War
much,
II.
I'd say. Hmm.
I haven't seen any, and I've looked.
Hmm.
But does it matter? I
Well,
mean,
I
we're
think it
getting
does. What matters is this supports your thesis that it's all theater.
yeah,
Yeah.
or theater, or I even call it even without taste, snuff movies because people die. Some people die. I don't know how many. It
Well,
seems
even
to,
with
it
COVID,
seems
remember
yeah.
the whole thing with COVID? They showed like this whole floor full of corpses, and one guy
Oh
starts
yeah, yeah, yeah.
moving,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they were telling you how packed the hospitals were. And I had doctor friends like, "There's nobody here. It's like a ghost town."
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. This was true in Europe as well.
Hmm.
That I was in the States with COVID, so yes, I remember that. Yeah, yeah. And
Good times.
no, no, I'm telling
But
you, since
it's all visual rhetoric. That's all it is.
I was telling Mike, I think since 9/11 we're in dismal times. I mean, the 90s in comparison were like to me they look to me they're lost Eden, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah, yeah,
yet
yeah.
and yet there were disquieting times as well. I mean, we had all those, Ruby Ridge and Waco and Oklahoma and the Unabomber. There were plenty of red flags, but still, yeah, it was Eden.
Yep.
Uh, but now we are, and there seems to be no way out. I mean, mm, it's kind of, yeah, disheartening. I mean,
What interests you? I'm not like running out. I could kind of hedge around this a little bit because I still think the like at this time, or tell me about this. I'll put forth not a thesis, but Michael, we talk about astrology every so often, Guido, on this show, and that I do use, not in a cheery way, but when I see things like the irredeemably, that's a bad word, but we see like the hospital structure crumbling in our time. So I'm going to sing like a little Illich song that I think we're seeing an end of an epoch now. Every young kid, these same ones who are questioning Israel Gaza, they're reading Oswald Spengler.
Hmm.
And that Spengler did seem to see so much, but it's also for me, kind of being a Christian, it's kind of fatalistic. Can't we, like Guido Preparata, look at building new institutions and so forth? But the type of thinking you're talking about, Guido, I'm not saying it's Debbie Downer, but for me, there's a sense that like amidst these kind of epochal changes, like the age of institutions, or when we look at what's going on with the papacy, I see something like a post-Charlemagnean era of history kind of crumbling, a way of doing church that's crumbling. I see, and some people are just using kind of the each era of 1,000 years. There's things going on. This isn't asking you specifically what you think about that, but do you, as a social scientist, do you cast that like all the way out? Because I was telling my son Aiden this morning that um, that you're such a scientist, or when my friend met up with you in Rome, Father Gerard, you could also be seen through you're searching for answers to these things. Like even when you're looking at the novels of Zsa to understand Sicily, to understand how power works. But being a scientist, where do you find hope? Or do you think that, like, I see, wow, an end of an epoch, things are certainly crumbling. When the sea's receding, it's breaking out of their shores, what do we harness? Do you, Guido, respond to kind of what you hear me saying? That I can say, Amy always accused me that I kind of see as many opportunities now. I do see things just kind of dying. in addition to seeing that, like we see the show going on, I just can't deny that I see as I drive around, not just the squalor in the cities, but some of these things about schools that just got too big that they just work almost like a life cycle. Like Illich said, they work against the ends that they were built to supply. When hospitals, with that institution, and right now we're also seeing the church, it got so institutional, it starts to work against those things that were originally designed to serve. So you have your kind of astute social science analysis, but like, do you do anything in your thinking with kind of a change of epochs? And I'm also not saying like, where do you find optimism? But say a little bit about that, because again, I'm just thinking of, I keep on saying our listeners, but they would be questions I would have, that when everything is super airtight, I don't necessarily see hope right now. Well, I do actually, but it would be um, that even these pretty airtight powers, if this is now a techno-feudalism, they never had so much power as they did with like the internet and everything like that. And still, this whole conversation we're having with the notion of like epoch, and even with Rudolf Steiner, the way that God works in history through grand plans. How does that type of thinking incorporate or kind of weave into your thinking, Guido?
Wow. It's a hell of a question.
Sure.
Good question. Um, yeah, you're mentioning Spangler. Spangler's written a masterpiece, and it's not his Decline of the West, which I could never really digest, but it's a small book,
Techniques, yeah. Yeah.
Technics and Mankind.
Mhm.
Phenomenal. The anti-Veblen, and it ends with that famous quote, optimism is for cowards.
Uh-huh.
um, and yeah, a phenomenal book, which for
Yeah.
me, in a course, I would just say it's obligatory reading. And I completely agree. For me, as I was also we were discussing before we started recording, a lot of people a lot of people are really it's depressing for them to hear somber analyses of the system because they don't want to hear them, or what I've been doing for the past 10 years of looking at templates from the insect realm. They're very offended by that. I am very offended that they get offended by that because
And segue into this book. My son and I have been reading
yeah,
a little bit. Yeah, go. Stay there.
I'm deeply offended by that because I'm not saying that we're bugs, although I'm saying something much deeper than that. And it's also it's something that I hurl at the face of so-called believers. People say, my faith is strong. Yeah, okay, your faith is strong. Okay. Or in Genesis, and I don't know, it says, and God created the animals. You say, wait a minute. Let's look at those animals and why. Why did he create in this way? And if you look at the dynamics of social insects, they are deeply fascinating and deeply disturbing. And so, who thought that? And who are they? They say romantically that they were peoples that kind of screwed things up and were reduced to being into insect form hundreds of millions of years ago, which raises a lot of question about a lot of things. And it seems like so-called believers are not really perturbed in any way by any of these questions, which I find absurd because that's all they should be thinking about. And I'm not interested in social insects because I think we're insects, although I'm thinking that the way they're pushing things is because they want to reduce us to being insects, and the
I
templates
do
are
too.
there.
Yeah.
And the
Mhm.
templates are there, and you better know them because you'll see. Not only that, the templates are there and they've long preceded us. So these are
Mhm.
essential questions, and the work entomologists have done are absolutely essential. And I wonder why they're not taught in all social science classes because they are extraordinary. One. Second, I believe that in going down, I remember giving a lecture to some Steiner people up in the north of Italy a couple of years ago, and the group leader was saying a lot of the people were starting to roll their eyes and go, "Man, so this is too heavy, dude." And they were like, "Oh, enough." And the gang leader who had invited me says, "No, no, no. He's doing something important here. He's bringing us down. He's bringing us down because we have to go down, right, guys?
We
We
do.
have to go down because eventually, it allows us to come back up." And I was thinking, yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that has to do with what you're saying, the empowerment. Empowerment is it's empowering to understand things even in the darkest of moments and even in the darkest of matters, because then you can start thinking about a way around them. And so this is why I'm deeply offended by all those
Good.
people that do not want to go where I want to go. Not because I'm morbidly interested in all sorts of sick stuff or into the dynamics of bugs, but because in these lower realms, you have to go. Because especially if you're a person who says he or she believes, how could you just like take your faith and not being concerned with this? Concerned with evil, concerned with sick stuff that's being done. And
Mhm.
it's, going back to the question of theodicy, as we said many times when we met before, that's the only thing as a believer that should be thinking about. And instead, we got these, I'm not really interested in those people that, I really appreciate, and I said this before, who really are into saying, well, I'm a physicist and I'm studying matter, and I realize by the complexity of matter that I'm talking to a very, very high. Because of my intelligence and capacity for abstraction, I'm in a position to dialogue with God.
Uh-huh.
And yes, in a sense, you are. But the problem is that at the center of this construction, built with like divine wisdom and divine knowledge and engineering, there's an altar where all sorts of abominations are being celebrated daily. The law of violence and the Holocaust. And so, not only do you have a problem about that, you got a problem of reconciliating that with this beautiful, harmonious constructions of the structure of matter. So there's a variety of problems, and you got to encompass them all. And encompassing them all, for me, I've responded to another question of yours. I've had to take the path of what some of those Indian gurus like Krishnamurti and others are saying, says you got to divest yourself of everything. Just say
Mhm.
yourself, I'm no longer a that, I'm no longer a that or this or that. I'm just somebody who's trying to get to the bottom of things. And this is where I'm going. So you're asking me, should I just throw everything overboard? And I'm saying, yeah.
Mhm.
For me, as I said many times, all these books that are on me, pretty much, if I were to set fire to the vast majority of them, there would be no problem because they're full of nothing. And the very few that have some kind of keys to understanding things. For instance, and then you're asking me about civilizations. And I remember because I would send my manuscript of one of my books to a friend who now is really involved with the Trump movement, and he was very offended by some of the things that I said. And he was like, "Well, what happened to the great Christian civilization and things like that?" And I say to him, well, first of all, you're talking to a European who's in the middle of it, so I'm kind of aware of what you're talking. And I'll just say to you, by way of repartee, with utmost, provocatory spirit, to me, there is no such thing as civilization. They're all constructions. There is no such thing as a Christian civilization. And I wrote this, and I don't want to offend anybody, but again, I said Christianity is what it is because it was so by imperial decree. If Constantine hadn't made it what it was, there would be no Christianity today. So think about that.
Mhm.
So to me, and there's no things of civilization either. For me, it's just one giant Holocaust and different aggregations that have wielded and wrought Holocausts with some more or less interesting art following in that kind of a wake. And so what I'm pointing with, and people say, oh, God, this sounds like some kind of absolutely outrageous piece of nonsense. And I say, well, the reason why I'm saying this, it's because I really want to put an end to this logic of slaughter that seems to be the only language we speak if we got to make a clean break with it all, which requires us to have a bonfire, not burn everything, but burn a lot of all these things we've been told are science, knowledge, and they're nothing of the sort. They're just accretions, as Frank Zappa said, to make us ignorant with class. And so we're at a stage where we don't give a damn about having class about anything. So maybe it's about time to take that step. But it takes some kind of a freedom to do that, which the vast majority of people don't have because there's mouths to feed, and you got to be, and you got, and et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah. I find that I'm most hopeful in the area that is something that I think you and I have in common. So for example, a little bit of like in current events that I knew, and I can only speak for myself, is that right after the Charlie Kirk assassination, when I saw certain Catholics, and I think like Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, certainly J.D. Vance, there seemed to be something where if we could pin this on necessarily left-wing radical violence, if we could pin that early with a little bit of a we're not sure, but move on this, we could reclaim something of a space for Christ. All right, I've got two problems with that. One is when the church itself is going through these epochal changes for me. I kind of go back to the gospel, and it seems to me there was one book I reviewed by this Dutch guy for a Front Porch Republic. He was kind of I cast him as a modern day Johnny Appleseed over, and I'm forgetting his name, but he just kind of got how the gospel just thought like, yeah, let's not confuse means and ends, bro. And my hero Stephen Vizenchi, his big thing, morality is yeah, let's most of the evil in this world is done from confusing means and ends. Like if we can stop Vietnam from going communist, we'll stop the whole Southeast Asia from going communist. So a little bit of violence here. So you have that kind of anti-consequentialism for me, Guido, and I think we need that to see this epoch through. And the other thing I see during this time is the people who want to use consequentialism. Let's do a little bit of a lie here or jump the gun here, and then seize power here in kind of a ruthless way because it's better than the bad guys. For me, that makes me sad because I don't even want like J.D. Vance's Christianity. I think we're moving into kind of an anarchist Christianity. I sense it in my gut. Michael, here.
Well, a bunch of things, but
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not like with the Charlie Kirk and the kind of Christian revival that's follow from that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
reclaiming
my
Christ
thing, but
for
I don't have a
the public
problem with it,
square. Uh,
it's a better response than violence, right?
oh, sure.
But the other thing, the
But the lie is a form of violence. If it depended on a lie, Michael, wouldn't that be? We knew this was left-wing violence, so therefore we're going to take away free speech before they know it.
well, I don't know about that either. I mean, I think
Yeah,
people say things in the aftermath of something and nothing really changes, really.
yeah.
But I do think, as far as, and I don't know if offering hope is the thing I'm bringing, but astrologically, as my friend John Michael Greer has said, and he's right. I mean, what's going on in the planets right now has only happened at the beginning of the axial age. So that's like going way back, right? So big, I think epochal change is upon us, and I do think that the bad guys, well, if you want to call them the Anglo-American Empire, whoever, they know it's coming. They know they can read the handwriting on the wall, and I think they're trying to go, as Guido always says, 10 steps ahead to try to get themselves in charge of the next iteration. But I don't know if that's going to be able to happen. Um, and one thing, it was kind of interesting looking at the movement of Pluto, which moves very slowly. It takes 280 years, something like that, to go across the zodiac, where it takes the moon a month. Uh, where it was in Capricorn for since about 2007 or 2008, which I would describe that until just recently as the age of the bankers. I mean, even though I know the bankers have been in charge for a long time before that, but this is when it became obvious to most people, especially with the mortgage crisis and things like that these guys were just floating, quantitative easing and funny, monopoly money. And I think that's kind of running out of gas, which is why they're trying to get to the age of digital currency, which is Pluto moving into Aquarius, the sign of high tech. Um, but I think, but there's a lot of other things going on at the same time, like Neptune moving into Aries is a big deal. Um, but I think epochal change is upon us, whether we want it or not. I don't know how it's going to unfold, but I do think that the power structure as it exists is is on its last legs. I mean, I could be wrong, and I'm sure they're going to try to become the new power structure too. I have no doubt about that. And I wrote about this in Transfiguration. I mean, this is before COVID, right? And so I don't know if I would call myself optimistic, but Well, put it this way. I think my optimism comes with the destruction of the decrepit. You know, does that make any sense? And I see that as you just mentioned, like you see it in the church. I mean, it's just like I can't even look at anything that's coming out of the Vatican anymore. You see it
That's
the
okay.
destruction. You see it in the destruction of those kinds of icons of the last age, right? And like almost like in Tolkien, we're going into a new age. You know, I don't mean new age in a new age way, but I think we're heading to a new age. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we definitely are heading to a new age. And so if I have any hope, it's that well, at least we can start over. Because I don't think, the things we talk about, perishable currency. I mean, perishable currency, they actually basically digital currency is perishable currency, just not run by the people using the currency. It's run by the banks, right? They turn off your money if you step out of line. So that's not what I had in mind with perishable currency, So, like I said, that my hope is that at least we get a chance to turn over, and that's what I think. You know, with we talk about building new things, and I'm all about building new things, but you have to live in a society or something that at least gives you the little bit of space to do that, because otherwise you get crushed, which is what I see happening in Ireland and in the UK. Is there's no space to create your own thing because they won't give you enough room to breathe.
Guido.
Yeah. I don't know, why do you single out Ireland and the UK?
Because their governments are really becoming uh, punitive. In fact, I just saw a statistic yesterday. 12,000 people in England were put in prison for social media posts.
Okay, okay.
You know, um, well, dissent is outlawed, right? And
No,
and
no.
they seem to be Ireland and the UK seem to be in Ireland, which is bizarre.
Mhm.
Seem to be all in on that the New World Order, right? And destroying and it's interesting. It's what I think you see is you see the who's ever in power willfully trying to destroy their own civilization or country, whatever you want to call it. Um, but not, but it's almost like it's a preemptive strike in a way because I think what they don't realize is they're the ones that are about to be destroyed, and so they're trying to preemptively destroy what used to be Christendom or whatever you want to call it, and any vestige of that. But I think, so that could be scary. But I think they're going to run out of
I
it's
think
not going to work.
is doing enough to destroy itself. I guess it's a small change, but it's like I can
Well,
only
there is
speak for
no
myself
Christendom.
as a no, right. And I see Guido thinking, but for me at this time, I give kind of Steiner and Owen Barfield some credit that at least for me, I work at this time that and I'm going back to saying like we're seeing the era of institutions, of massive institutions run by kind of clerical castes. The thing the Catholic priest, the doctor, and the educator have in common is they're tyrannous. In each of their institutions, they took on judicial, legislative, and executive functions within themselves. So the priest,
Yeah,
if he disagreed with you, that era, which Illich would say only really started with under Charlemagne and Alcuin, where the priesthood role got merged
right,
with the pastor role. And then that was the first disabling
right.
profession.
Deacon, priest, and bishop, or you can say assistant professor, associate professor, full
Yeah,
professor.
and you can say like nurse, doctors, and things
Yeah,
like that, where the doctors get to expand, how many things fall under the purview of medicine. The church gets to expand that everything's a spiritual problem, and the professors of education. So that era of institutions is kind of dying, and this is simplistic, but I think we're given some poetry to work here. That what I try to do is to say there's got to be a false movement that says everything from that time period of institutions is totally, horrible. So we just go back to the time before. But like, I think what we're looking for is like, if I was mangled in a car wreck today, I'm glad there's a doctor who could look at me as a piece of meat and chop me up and maybe put my leg back on. But I'm also like, thank you very much, but I'd rather take, herbal medicines and like some more natural ways of healing. But there's a way of both of them.
Hmm.
Um, I think like things like math, some aspects of maths and science can be taught well in sitting in square rooms under fluorescent lighting with people your own age. Only thing we know about the person in front of us definitively is they've been in the square room longer than us, but we give it a go. And meeting every day in 45-minute segments can work pretty well for some of those. But apart from that, the idea of school buildings and classes and taking every subject with people your own age, it's dying with this era. But it doesn't mean that there wasn't some utility in that. And the same thing with the church. The institutionalization of the church is kind of crumbling. Whether we use Benedict, a smaller, more vital church, or just the fact that like it's bricking, it's just
Right.
sounding off with everything it says. But next to that is so Powys gave the wonderful image of this epoch we could be moving into is a sense of where sailor's embarkation meets sailor's return, where the divine feminine, the return to the womb, meets this period of individuation and alienation, so that the more Guido Preparata becomes distinctly Guido, the more he feels like he's in community and not a crowd. Illich pointed us that we're in an epoch where we have the worst is the corrupt of the best. So there's loneliness in a crowd. That's the big thing. There's the difference between freedom and license, the difference between hope and optimism, the difference between care and love. We're going to be untangling these things. And I think if we, in smaller communities, faith communities, that when we start building kind of unlimited liability associations, people are going to need to depend on each other. I see like new, where all this during this period of institutions, housing went from being like a verb to a noun, and mission went from being like a verb going out to people and a noun, where the natives had to come to us for Western education as well as shots, And when I see those things tumbling in real time, I think we can sense the poetry of something of the next harmonic movement, which is a return with a difference. Some of that stuff we knew in the primitive church, that without castigating the whole era
Yeah.
of institutional church, they probably civilized. I don't know. There might have been some civilization of the Franks that took place, but
Hmm.
I'm not saying we go back to just the early
No.
church. But I think we have some themes how we push into the third movement of the score.
Yeah.
Because I think
Well,
there's a
I think it,
divine musician, there's a divine artist. Yeah.
but I think also what you're describing, Mike, is what which I always heard, but now it makes more sense with Steiner's thing about the need to create new forms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's where I think we're finally at a place where the world might be ready to do that.
Mhm.
Um, just because the old forms don't work anymore.
Yeah. And watching the old forms fall is going to be
It's
funny
just
and
it's
sad. And there's going to be
yeah,
good
but
people that are hurt
it's
by it.
transition, but that's how it goes, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Guido. Yeah.
No, I agree. Unfortunately, I don't see the crumbling yet. I'd love to see it, but they're digging in.
Well, they are
But
digging in, but I don't think it's gonna last. But we'll see.
I hope so. Things that I jotted down, Vietnam. It's about what a lot of people are saying, that it says before we do reform, we have to do education. In other words, you hear a lot about a lot of these people in our circles that dream of founding universities and schools
Hmm.
because for obvious reasons. Because as I was saying, all these degrees that we've been given are worthless, and so we have
Worthless.
to, yeah, we have to rethink everything. I think Michael was mentioning, or math, or was you, Mike?
Yeah.
Math is another huge one. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but nowadays, they don't teach math because they want to teach math. They use the teaching of math to identify that 10% who are gifted with it,
Yeah.
and they call them more intelligent than the others. And
Tie this into your book a little bit, Guido, because it's a direct comparison. Start teasing people because when the book is published, we'll have you talk about it, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and
It's a
of
sorting
those,
system. The beehive is a sorting system.
yes, and of those 10%, only there's another 1%, I mean, another 10% of that, so 1% that actually understands what it does with the math. Because some people are just good. You throw a ball at them and they run with the formula, and that's that. They don't even know where it comes from. And I've seen this at even high levels of school in doctoral programs, and and when you and as such, they don't want people to know math. But math is logic. Everybody should be able to handle it. You got people who are good musicians that didn't do well at math, which doesn't make any sense because our music is ratios. And the reason is that they don't teach it. They mangle it because they need to identify those number crunchers because that's what society values in this technological apparatus. Because
Mhm.
math, in it's the way it's taught, the way it's collected and anthologized in the books, is really atrocious. It's tedious as hell, and most of it, from the most interesting part of math, it's the history of math, which they don't teach. And you
Mhm.
realize, from what I've seen, 90% of it comes from astronomy. So technically, you should be having courses on the stars where they tell you how they were first observing them and how they got those rules from them. And I
Mhm.
assure you, if things were taught in this way, everybody would be proficient in math in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Understanding them that, past elementary school, that the numbers in your head, but the math is a language that was assembled thereafter. And all of a sudden, you got everybody on board. And those who are gifted are going to be there like a half hour before the others, but by the end of the day, everybody masters it. But that's
Mhm.
not what they want. And this
Yep.
is just one of the several atrocities of this abominable system we're in. Vietnam, yeah, but every single episode in
Sure.
history is misunderstood.
Mhm.
Vietnam, they always say, well, yeah. They're saying, yeah, it was a communist. It was an experiment. It was just a
Mhm.
stage where they were trying new
Mhm.
weapons. They were emptying the arsenals, and China offered one of its subcolonies to play the game. It was one of the most atrocious things that was ever consummated in that abominable century.
Mhm.
Um, Anarchistic Christianity. There is in my book. I cited in my book.
Something like that's the future.
Yeah, I said in my book on the church a quote by that French nationalist, the Maurras, who he
Yeah.
was saying that it's like a neocon. It's the early neocons that say, we need Christians and Catholics, and we need to support them in our rhetoric, and just like Bush the second, because their martyr complex makes them excellent soldiers.
Yeah.
And
This
the
is super important stuff in your work, the
and,
devoutness factor. And we
and
have to
but
look
yeah,
at ourselves. Yep.
and Moras, I don't know if it's him or Evola. I think it was Moras. It says something. I put the quote there because for Catholics this is crucial. It says, and the last thing we want, it's the anarchistic brand of Catholics, the
Yeah.
Tolstoyans and all that
Yeah.
other disgusting rabble, because those ones, they're not going to fight. And the risk is that they're going to pledge allegiance to Christ instead of the institution. So they're the worst. And so, and I'm thinking, well, that's exactly where you should be if you call yourself a Christian. And and not only that, this over reliance on the bastion of the church is a weakness. You have got to think of your faith, I would say to a Catholic, of your own legs and your own muscles to support it. Or else, because I have the sensation a lot of Catholics and whatever's left in this decrepit situation here in Italy is that they only are nostalgic about what the church was as a bastion of power, which is really, I mean, it's despicable.
Mhm.
So something absolutely not something I want to have to do. And like you go to the Vatican and Julius II commissioned the great warrior, the warrior pope. I don't give a damn. It's this. Well, yeah, but you got the Michelangelo stuff. Yeah, okay, but what does that tell me about the deeper mission of the faith? Nothing. As I was saying before, it's a history of power followed by some art, good or less good art, and whatnot. But again, notion of civilization escapes me completely. But maybe, who was this? Sharon says, if there is a homeland, the homeland is actually the language. And so that's an interesting thing I saw. In language, yes, a language is you can be patriotically linguistic, and maybe becoming polyglots is another direction of going. Becoming truly patriotic in the Melvillian sense of patriotic to heaven, as you speak as many languages as possible. Then
Wow.
maybe the slaughter can end. But To vis-a-vis your expectant and good words, I share them completely. I'm not seeing the crumbling yet, and there's so much work to do, and I think we'll never see it in our lifetime. It's going to be generation after us, where
Mhm.
the idiom of violence is so strong, so ingrained, that we can only attempt to lay the foundations for a change in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your quote from Maras in Empire and Church and some other places, that area of your research has been some of my favorite. That it's recognized by the people who really understand power. They immediately recognize it. And so, no, 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 we need this kind of other type of truculent, this other type of devout kind of Catholicism, and we need to work with that. And I think it's super relevant now, and that's where I see that we can start. It's going to take a while to work it out, but that's my big thing now. That not from a stance of say Jim Martin or something, but we need leftist critics of the left and conservative critics of the right. But there, that truck, you use the word truculent a lot, but that kind of militaristic Catholicism, which I'm going to say, and I've got to talk to my friend Bill Kaufman, that J.D. Vance seems to be parroting. We just early before they can get too far on this, I think we need to call them out for it. And again, it's because it's confusing means and ends. I'm going to stake my life on to say the gospel that's going to make it through this period of the bubbling cauldron, we're going to come out again with what William Blake saw as some of the essence of this stuff, a veritable orgy of forgiveness. Don't confuse means and ends, and the equality of all souls. And a couple weeks ago, I might need you to read this Eugen Rosenstock QC, Guido, because he is so good on language, and he went to knock on Spengler's door because he was gobsmacked by they lived at the same time. Uh, Rosenstock was in the Battle of the Verdun. He got it, and he knew that we needed a strenuous existence, but he got touched with kind of the gospel and he went to knock on Spengler's door and he said, Mr. Spengler, you said that like all of these cultures don't really seed each other. There's no real progress. And he said, but even in your own work, you're showing they do and so forth. And Spengler was, most cordial, but in the way, I think it's Chat GPI available too. Spengler, like so many powerful theoreticians, and this is where, again, like John Michael Greer, I know I love him, but during this time, we're going to need the Christian ferment. He's kind of caught up, or a lot of people who are reading Spengler now, my son's friends, they're caught up in this ability to see these cycles. And I think that can be a pretty dark place. Not that we shouldn't read them. But again, I want to say is I don't know who I am if I don't know there was a thing called the gospel that the whole point was like newness. And anyhow, I think the confusing of means and ends when we look at Vietnam, historically, if we can just call out people who say it's right there in Stephen Sondheim's, um, I think it's magisterial Into the Woods. It's just he has the demonic figure of just playing people that hold a little bit of resentment here, told a little lie over here. And then all of a sudden we start hurling accusations about them, and all they get to do is whip the whole thing into a maelstrom and a whole. So the witch is just saying, you told a little lie, you did this, you confuse means and ends here, and it eventually builds up. And then whether we want to call it an egregore or something, kind of whips up all this kind of subtle things where we just did this little bit of evil over here, and it just leads to an apocalypse. But it kind of crashes, and then children start trying to teach their parents again some of the basics. But I think we're going through a period that one of the things, the way online they're using the word Jesus right now is a little bit weird, and then and the way they're using heaven, like in this new epoch we got to move into, the kingdom of God was proclaimed as a reality that's pressing in on us now, also at the end of life. During this institutionalization period, post-Charlemagnean that we're into, they really emphasize the end of life thing, transactional, do this good stuff here, and then get to place A and avoid place B. But during our time, I'm going to name one more theme, is that I think we're moving from one Catholic mythos that kind of has your average Catholic using an image, and I don't mean this to extend any farther than just a simple image, but we live a life, we die, and we go, and St. Peter comes and meets us at the pearly gates. And we see ourselves in a position where we get to say, like, I got to Mass, I tried not to lie too much, and things like that. And we kind of get in. But the new salvation story of our time, and it's there in the story of Zacchaeus, I say a lot, but it kind of comes from Simone Weil in her essay on the right use of school studies towards the developing of attention. towards a view of the love of God, she tells the Grail story. And I think in doing so, she gives us a whole new view of salvation for our time. But she almost frames the salvation story as if, like, Guido Preparata died and you went to heaven. St. Peter looked at you and he said, Guido, ask me the right question that showed me you kind of got this whole thing, this whole like reason you're here, or just the whole thing. And her question was, um, and it's there in the Grail literature with the Fisher King and the Grail Castles, like, what is it that you are going through, right? And I see the gospel in our time with all these crowd formations, which are the most dangerous political phenomenon ever when a community turns into a crowd. And I encourage people to look at the gospel. The gospel can't be heard by a crowd. Politicians speak to crowds. They're very good at it, in fact. If Jesus was talking to a community and it became a crowd, which happens, he would go to the other side of the lake. But right now, we're rescuing people from all these crowd formations, all this groupthink, and one by one releasing them. I spoke to a young adult dance. These are 21 to like 35-year-olds, 100 of them. They're all kind of lonely in the city of Rochester. It was a Catholic dance that was part Brooklyn, the movie, like an Irish dance in New York City, and something new. But there was a lot of loneliness there, but it was kind of a beautiful thing. But the idea of just a salvation in our life being, we have our work cut out for us. There's so many lonely people, meeting them where they're at and say, what is it that you're going through? 2,000 years after the incarnation, this idea of just saying the Pater Noster and going to a church just isn't good enough. Like in the story of the Good Samaritan, not the Good Samaritan, but the prodigal son, you have a point where it's the whole gospel as Steiner knew in 16 verses of the whole Bible, but it's a descent and a return. And at a certain point, we spend time in the pig pen. The prodigal son spent time there, and that's where he came, it says, to know himself. He had to come to terms with himself. So much of religion in our time, coming out of this era that's leaving, is we use piety to make sure we never have to go meet ourselves in that place. Give me beliefs promise me heaven so I never have to actually go and find who I am. But the incarnation is pressing through, and we're going to have to take a journey through people who, in knowing others, kind of know themselves. But I just think there's so much work and so many hopeful things that I see the incarnation working through our time. It's less likely a young person who just is asked to bury who they are to just take a job now, like even 50 years they could do. My dad became an accountant because his dad was good at numbers. I don't think my dad was called to be an accountant, but he was German and he became one.
But he
And
was German. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so he did it. And I just think it's harder to tell your kid, like, hey, I have in a pocket there, just some business selling trinkets. You've got to take over the business. And I think that's the working out of the incarnation. But I see all this stuff kind of as it bubbling in our time. I really do. I really do.
By the way, audience, Mike is about to start an accounting business.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Concluding thoughts. Philip had to text. His family, he's a father of young children. His family took him away this morning. But I know he wants to talk to you on the podcast sometime, but we'll set that up. Anything, concluding thoughts as we kind of wind down here and I want to talk to you after, Guido, about our thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I was just reflecting on what you said. It was very deep. Yeah. I just hope that that I can do something significant for the change that we've been all and I realized that as I was telling you before we started, I think that makes me and makes the movement suffer is how disconnected and fragmented we are.
Yeah.
In a way. I mean, what we have here is great that we talk about. I mean, I guess our fellowship should be something where, I don't know, we should be a lot closer, seeing each other
Mm-hmm.
more. But it costs a lot to travel, and we're unfortunately we're not organized as much as we know we should be.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope we'll be able to find ways to make that union happen, to form, I don't call it party, certainly a movement where, like, I don't know, call it the movement purple. And he says, yeah, I'm with the purples. And yeah, and that says it all, and because, it's like, we're not a movement. The others are organized and we're not,
Yeah.
and I think we It's about time we give shape to the movement, which
Mhm.
can have all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life, but
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah.
something like
Well,
that.
yeah. No, all sorts of people. Well, again, thanks everyone for listening to the Regeneration podcast. Michael, we can I think your schedule with the CSA is freeing up a little bit more. I had a very busy September for sure, and we can start kind of regrouping. Guido, when do you think your book is going to be published? And when I mentioned staying after with Guido a little bit, I want to talk about his book and his the
So it's two books. It's
okay.
the abridged version of the Ideology of Tyranny, which in a much more digestible format called Reign of Discursive Terror, and its companion piece called Towards a Social Empire. God willing, by November, early November.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay. And events in our time, I can tell listeners that in my mind, Ideology of Tyranny and this new Reign of Discursive Terror, this is the book that saw everything we're living through right now so closely. Again, it's how the same loss of freedom on the speech can just handle, because he traces the political correctness phenomenon as a conservative phenomenon that kind of precedes Michel Foucault. And we see it from the neocons and also on the left and this game and how it's played. But it's unique. I think Angela Franks was kind of singing something maybe kind of close some years ago, but nobody quite did what you did in that book. So I'm glad you making it available to a reading public. Michael, I look forward to seeing everybody next week on the Regeneration podcast. Thanks.